Hi, my name is Beth and I'm the sewing pattern designer and blogger at Sew DIY. Today I'm going to show you how to make a knit loo box top from beginning to end. The loo box top is one of my patterns and it's the most popular pattern in my collection. And the instructions show you how to make it in either a woven or a knit fabric. And I have a sew along on the blog that has lots of photos and text, but it mostly covers how to make it in a woven fabric. So today I'm going to show you how to make it in a knit fabric and go over each step in a lot of detail, and you'll get to see exactly what happens when you make a top like this. I'm going to put a whole bunch of links down in the show notes so that you can purchase the pattern, you can check out that sew along. I also have some other helpful videos for top stitching with a twin needle and some general tips for sewing with knits. Today I'm going to be using a conventional machine. This is a Janome Memory Craft. I'm going to be using a walking foot, so if you have one of those, make sure to grab it. I'm also going to be using a serger, and if you don't have a serger, that's okay. You can still use your conventional machine. Just make sure to use a stretch stitch instead of the serging stitches. Let's get started. So we're going to start off by sewing the left shoulder of our top. I have my back piece and my front piece right sides together, and we're going to stitch this seam at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, now that's stitched and we can take this to the pressing table and get ready to attach our neckline. So here we have our top with one shoulder seam stitched and the seam allowance is pressed to the back, and I have it right side up here. And then I have our neck band, and this is folded with the wrong sides together and pressed. So now we are going to pin the neckband to the neckline. So for this we want to measure the quarter points in our neckband and in the neckline of the top. So I'm going to fold this in half and mark that halfway point with a pin. You could also mark the halfway point with a washable marker. So then we'll fold it in half again and mark the quarter points. You just want to be careful not to pin through both layers. All right, so our neck band is pinned, and now we'll want to do the same thing with our neckline. So one way to do it would be to use a flexible measuring tape and measure the length of the neckline and then divide it by 4 and mark the quarter points. But I like to actually just fold the neckline like we did with the neck band. So I start by placing these two ends together and then just folding it in half, keeping this curve together. And we mark this halfway point with a pin, and then we fold it in half again. And just try to keep those curved edges together, and then we mark these quarter points. Okay, so let's unfold this so that we can see it. So we have pins at the quarter points and one at the halfway point. So now we're going to take our neck band and pin it to the neckline. So we'll pin one end to this shoulder and then match this quarter point. And your neckband should be a little bit smaller than your neckline. And we're going to stretch the neckband to fit the neckline. So we will match this halfway point and then this quarter point. And then we will match this end to this shoulder point. All right, so now that we have this pinned, we can take it over to the sewing machine. Now I'm going to baste the neckband onto the neckline. The reason that I baste it first is that it can be really tricky to determine what the correct length of this band should be. So I baste it first to make sure that it's the right size. And the reason it can be tricky is that different fabrics have a different amount of stretch. So sometimes you'll need a smaller band or a larger band depending on your fabric. So I have my machine set to a basting stitch about 4.8, and I have my walking foot here to help feed through this knit fabric. I'm also using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So as I stitch, I'm going to gently pull the neckband to meet or to match the length of the neckline, and be careful not to pull on the neckline. And actually, I'm going to do this differently. You can do this with the neckband up, but I usually like to do it with the top, with the garment up and the neckband on the bottom, because I've found that sometimes the curve of the top will kind of creep away from the neckband, and I won't notice until I'm done stitching. So if I have the garment on top, I can kind of monitor it and make sure that the raw edges are meeting with the neckband. So let's do a couple stitches. Okay. Now I'm going to pull on the band to make it match. And if you feel like this distance is too far for you to monitor, you can add another pin at the 1/8 points. So I'm just going to pull this and flatten out my garment and match those raw edges. So I'll do a little bit and then do the rest, because this is kind of a deep scoop neck on this top, so there's a little more fabric to handle. And knit fabrics tend to curl, so it can be really tricky sometimes to get them to lay flat. Like these little buggers. I'm going to put a pin in this. All right. Yeah, this fabric doesn't want to lay flat. Okay. All right. Approaching this pin. And now I'll go find my next pin and kind of sort out this section. All right, these edges look like they're cooperating a little bit better. So you can just stitch along. Got to our next quarter point, and now let's make sure we have these raw edges meeting. Okay. Okay, and now just this last part. Adjust that a little bit. Okay. Don't forget to hold your neckband tight. Okay. And cut that. And now we can take this over to our iron and give it a look and see if we're happy with the fit of the neckband to the neckline. So I have my iron, and I'm just going to gently press the neckband away from the garment. The seam allowance goes towards the garment, and then the neckband is in the center. And it always helps to have a little bit of steam with this. So at this stage you can see if you have any wrinkles or just anything that doesn't look quite right, and then take out those basting stitches and do it again. So let's see. Let's pretend this is our finished top. Are we happy with this stitching? The front looks good, and then let's look at the back. That looks pretty smooth, so I think this is good. Now we can go to the serger and stitch this seam for real this time. Okay, so we have our neckband basted onto the right side of our top at the neckline and feeling pretty good about this fit. So let's go ahead and serge it in place. So again, I'm using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and we'll just want to be careful not to get any wrinkles and not to get any of the top caught up in this stitching. So now we can go ahead and give this a press, and we will press the seam allowance towards the top and this binding or the neckband towards the inside of the neckline. Okay, I've pressed my seam and I have my machine set up with a twin needle, and I've turned on my twin needle function. I have a video all about using a twin needle, and I will link that in the show notes. So I'm just going to stitch right next to this seam line and on top of the seam allowance. If you don't want to use a twin needle, you can skip this step, or you can use a zigzag stitch with a regular needle. All right, let's unfluff this. We're almost done. You might notice I kind of messed up when I was serging and I did a bigger seam allowance right here. I think it's because I was doing a video at the same time, but I'm just gonna leave it because it's in the back. It's just a t-shirt, doesn't really matter. It's still doing the function that it's intended to do. So just a reminder that everyone makes mistakes and it's not a big deal. Okay, usually I would leave a long thread and then pull them away and tie it in a knot, but I forgot. And when we serge this seam, it's gonna get trimmed anyway, so don't have to worry about it here. Our next step is going to be sewing together this remaining shoulder seam. So let's head back to our serger. So I've pinned this shoulder seam right sides together, and I'm going to stitch it. And we're using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm just gonna kind of pull this to the side, try to keep it all lined up and like pull it with a pin. Oh, come here. I'm gonna just pull this fabric with my finger. Very carefully. Okay. All right, so we have that seam done. I'm going to tie this in a knot and then use a needle to thread this end in through this seam. Now before I go to my pressing station, I'm going to finish the edges of the sleeves because our next step is to hem these. So I'm gonna go right sides up, doesn't really matter, and I'm gonna turn off the knife. And then we'll repeat on the other side. Okay, so we've stitched the shoulder seams and I've serged this edge of the sleeve, and now I'm just going to fold it in about 1 inch and press in order to prepare it for top stitching. So it's kind of curling on me, but a little bit of steam from this iron is going to help. So you just want to keep it all even, and putting a couple of pins in will help it stay in place. Okay, so here's one side, and then we'll repeat with the other side. Now I'm going to top stitch the hem of the sleeve, and I have my machine set up with a twin needle, and I'm using a stitch length of 3.0. So I have kind of long tail threads, and I'll slide this under here. And what I'm going to try to do is stitch right along the serged edge, because if I stitch farther in, this will flip back. So I want to keep this as flat as possible. And I'll just kind of feel with my fingers to make sure I'm stitching as close to that edge as I can. Okay, that's all done. We'll repeat for the other side, and then we'll stitch up our side seams. Now I'm going to stitch this top edge of my pocket. I folded it along the fold line with the right sides together, and I've already finished the edges of the pocket with a serger. And then I have my machine set to a lightning stitch, and I'm going to stitch from the fold down to the edge of the fabric with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then I'll do the same on the other side. And I cut my fabric a little weird at these little corners. I think I was trying to be thrifty. So ignore that. It's going to be hidden on the inside of the pocket anyway. Okay. So now that we have that, we will fold it wrong sides together, and then this is going to be the top edge of our pocket. So we'll poke out those corners and give it a press, and press in these sides. I have serged the edges and just folded in everything and given it a good press. And then what I like to do is try on the top and figure out the placement where I would like to have my pocket. But you can also use the markings that are in the pattern. So I usually use the markings first and then pin it on and try the top on and see if I like it. If I don't, I'll reposition. So you can either pin this pocket in place or use a glue stick to just lightly tack it down. And you can put this pocket on at any point during the sewing process. It can be a little bit easier to handle before you do the side seams, but it's personal preference and kind of depends on your priorities. If you want to make sure that the placement is exactly where you want it, or if you want to prioritize ease of sewing. All right, so let's go back to the machine and do some top stitching. Now I'm going to stitch on my pocket. I tried on my top and adjusted the position of my pocket so that it's in a place that I like, and I'm set up with the twin needle. So I'm just going to slide this under. And I want to pull my threads to be kind of long because when I'm done, I want to tie them in a knot. So I'm just going to line this up here, and I want to stitch as close to the folded edge of my pocket as I can. So drop this down and start stitching. Flipped out a little bit, so just tuck this back in. I'm just going to use a pin to poke in this little bit of the pocket and hide it. All right, so as we get down here, we want to get in pretty close to the edge, And then we're going to lift our needle and lift the presser foot, and then very, very carefully rotate this. And we want to drop the presser foot. And then I'm going to use my hand wheel and bring down the needles so I can try to get it into that right side line of stitching. So this, you just want to be really careful because you don't want a jumble of threads on the wrong side, but it's not too bad. Just go slowly. And then we'll we're going to stitch to our next, stitch to the next corner. I'm going to do my little tuck trick for this end. Get it in there. Make those corners behave. I think that's good. So now we'll lift our presser foot and lift the needle and very carefully rotate. And then drop it down and hand wheel down our all the way to the end. One more. All right. Now I will lift the needle and presser foot again, and then just pull a long thread. Come here. Okay. And I'm going to trim this, and then I will pull these threads to the wrong side and tie them in a knot. Now I'm going to stitch the side seams of the top. I have it pinned together, and I'm going to use my serger to stitch these seams. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And now let's do the other side. This side's all ready and pinned together. Okay, so our final step is to stitch the hem. So I have serged this edge, and now I'm just going to press it up about 1 inch. You can do however much you want, and just give it a press. Pin this in place, and then we'll go back to the machine and top stitch it down. Final step, we're going to top stitch this hem. I'm going to use my twin needle again, but you can do a zigzag if you like. Okay, and just like with our sleeve hems, I'm going to try to stitch right on top of this serged edge. Alright, and lift our needle and our presser foot, pull it away, and then we can bring those threads to the wrong side and tie them in a knot. We're all done. Well, I hope that that video was helpful for you. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and then hit the little bell to be notified whenever I release new videos. Happy sewing!